Look at the sky today, and you'll find it crowded with hardware from private startups and emerging nations. Commercial companies are regularly sending massive payloads into orbit and bringing the boosters back down to fly again. But to understand how we reached this point, we have to look back to a time when crossing the atmosphere was a terrifying, exclusive monopoly held by two paranoid superpowers. The physics of leaving Earth started as pure theory. In 1919, Robert H. Goddard published a paper proposing that liquid fuel pushed through a specially shaped nozzle could generate enough thrust to reach extreme altitudes, turning science fiction into an engineering blueprint. 25 years later, the Nazi German military weaponized those theories. In 1944, a V-2 rocket roared off a launch pad and became the very first human-made object to cross the boundary into space. When World War II ended, the United States and the Soviet Union scrambled to capture those German scientists and their remaining rocket parts. The technology was absorbed into their respective militaries, setting the stage for a new kind of proxy battle. Neither side was looking at the stars out of a pure desire for exploration. Stacking a massive rocket on a launch pad and successfully firing it over the horizon was a highly visible, undeniable demonstration that a nation had the capacity to deliver a thermonuclear warhead to the other side of the planet. The Soviet Union struck first. In October 1957, they launched a polished aluminum sphere equipped with 4 simple radio antennas. Sputnik 1 transmitted a continuous beep back to Earth, proving their technological dominance and shocking the American public. 4 years later, the Soviets amplified that shockwave. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin completed a 108-minute orbit around the planet, proving that human beings could survive the extreme conditions of spaceflight. The United States responded by mobilizing massive swaths of its industrial base and pouring billions of dollars into a new civilian agency called NASA. By July 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were leaving boot prints in the lunar dust. But the moment the United States declared victory, the momentum vanished. Without an existential rival breathing down their neck, the political motivation to keep funding massive lunar expeditions completely dissolved. By 1972, the Apollo missions were permanently grounded. The two nations had treated space as a high-stakes sprint. Once the finish line was crossed, the financial checkbook was snapped shut, and the race was over. The geopolitical temperature dropped noticeably in July 1975. An American Apollo capsule and a Soviet Soyuz spacecraft maneuvered together in orbit, physically docked, and their crews shook hands. Both nations recognized that returning to the moon was too expensive to justify. Instead, they redirected their engineering efforts toward staying in low Earth orbit for months at a time, building out the architecture for long-term habitation. They approached this problem from opposite directions. The United States developed the Space Shuttle, a massive reusable spaceplane designed to haul heavy cargo. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union launched the core module of Mir, slowly assembling a sprawling, multi-node space station. Maintaining a permanent presence in a vacuum proved to be an exercise in extreme logistics. Launching supplies, repairing life support, and mitigating radiation required more capital and engineering expertise than any single country could efficiently sustain. The extreme hostility of low Earth orbit forced former enemies to pool their resources. What began as a theater for military posturing was transforming into a mandatory diplomatic sanctuary. This collaborative momentum peaked with the construction of the International Space Station. Orbiting 250 miles above the Earth, it required hundreds of spacewalks and exact coordination between former rivals to snap its modules together. Operating the ISS distributed the financial burden across multiple borders. European and Asian space agencies gained invaluable experience quietly flying their own astronauts and sending automated cargo ships alongside the US and Russia. This bar chart demonstrates the glaring vulnerability of this arrangement. It tracks the unsustainably high cost per kilogram to launch payloads during the space shuttle era. Every trip relied on aging, highly bespoke, and enormously expensive government-run vehicles. By 2011, the space shuttle fleet was grounded permanently due to mounting costs and lethal safety flaws. The United States suddenly had no domestic way to launch its own astronauts, forcing them to buy seats on Russian Soyuz rockets. The global space community had built an incredible outpost in orbit, but created a massive economic bottleneck in getting there. That staggering inefficiency left a wide-open opportunity for a totally different kind of player. As the 2010s progressed, the era of global collaboration began to crack. The United States formally banned NASA from cooperating bilaterally with China, and escalating conflicts on the ground triggered international sanctions that isolated the Russian space program. Into this fracturing landscape stepped New Space. Agile, privately funded companies operating with Silicon Valley mentalities began moving faster than the lumbering government bureaucracies. SpaceX succeeded where decades of government-funded research had stalled. By engineering multi-engine boosters that fire their engines and land vertically on concrete pads, they stopped discarding millions of dollars in hardware with every launch. This descending line graph maps the exponential crash in the cost of reaching low Earth orbit from 2010 to the present day. Rapid reusability successfully slashed the price tag of escaping Earth's gravity. By dramatically lowering the financial barrier to entry, these private companies turned what was once an exercise in national prestige into a highly lucrative, competitive commercial freight service. At the same time, nationalistic ambitions have returned with full force. China has leveraged its Long March rocket architecture to rapidly deploy a fully operational, independent space station, keeping it continuously crewed. India has emerged as a major independent player, executing highly complex interplanetary missions, like a successful Mars orbiter at a fraction of the cost of legacy space agencies. Today's orbital landscape looks nothing like the stark two-player standoff of the 1960s. We are watching a chaotic mix of commercial billionaires deploying massive satellite constellations, while competing superpowers draft blueprints for permanent lunar bases. The trajectory of space exploration is a perfect mirror of the geopolitical forces on the ground. It started as a paranoid proxy war, thawed into a fragile peace, and has now exploded into a fierce multipolar gold rush.